Worlds 2021 meta could be the most diverse meta that I think would ever be in existence of Worlds history. And I don't say this in terms of just, as is always cited, champion diversity, but I think it's going to be because of item diversity and item builds, and then how you believe your item philosophy then revolves around champions. Because I think items, when you look at it, first of all, this is the first year in which Riot has completely overhauled the entire item system, introduced multiple different new items. And when you think about items just fundamentally, it changes almost every single champion in the entire game, right? Largely, this is based upon class of the particular champion, and then if they can theoretically even use the item or not, right? Like, obviously there are some items that champions just really can't even feasibly use. If they don't have good AP ratios, then they probably aren't going to be able to use any AP items, right? So you can cut off a slew of the items that Riot introduced. But with that said, I think items in general, because they can basically almost influence any single champion, right? As I said before, they have to deal within that particular class. But items then have a very large unintended consequence when they get introduced into the game. I can think of, items in the past before. Actually, I did an article about this entire subject of the most OP items in League of Legends history. And I'll actually link that article down in the description. But you think of things like Deathfire Grasp, right? Which, LeBlanc was just monstrous on. And on top of that, Deathfire Grasp had that active to where I think it was enemies take an increased 25% damage or something ridiculous, 25 increased magic damage from you. So, and it was a clickable targeted active, right? And so famously, of course, Faker made this shit super OP because he would use LeBlanc and just completely obliterate people. And then so Riot was just like, okay, can't have that shit in the game. So they removed it, or they removed the active, at least at the very beginning. Phantom Dancer, that was a very, I think, one of the most initial items to where Riot was just like, okay, this can't really exist in the game the way that it does, because it used to give this stat called dodge, to where it would literally just have your character not take damage from an auto attack. So it would be a like 20% chance, I think it was on Phantom Dancer, to where you could automatically dodge an auto attack. And so you could then fill your inventory with Phantom Dancers, so you could do 20%, 40%, 60%, right? And then so you would have 3, and then obviously famously back in the day, Ninja Tabbies also had dodge on it too. I think it was like 15% or maybe 10. And then Jax used to have a dodge passive on his E just inherently. It wasn't even like the helicopter spin as we know it now. It was just an automatic passive that he had, that he would spin whenever that he was dodging, and he had like a 10% dodge built into that ability. So it was just completely fucking busted, right? But Riot never had thought of that before when they introduced that item. Runeglaive, a more recent item you can think of, which Ezreal mid was a ridiculous tyrant. Runeglaive, it ended up giving AP to, it was like a percentage of AP or something that was super busted, and it gave a Luden's Echo proc on top of that. It was just completely ridiculous and very, very overpowered. And Riot had to super scale that one back. Spear of Sojin was another one, which basically reduced your CDR massively when you got that item. Renekton was ridiculous. I think he could use like 3 stuns on you or something, and so you would just like kind of be perma stun locked the entire time. Riven was also ridiculous with it because, obviously her Q spam was ridiculous, and she's already a cooldown based champion anyways. So when you start to get more cooldown on top of that, because I think it was when you use your ultimate, you end up getting more CDR. Ardent Sensor is obviously another item that ridiculously busted the entire meta back. I think that was in 2018, I want to say. So it's very clear that items completely change the entire meta, and it changes a lot of different champions and the champion pools themselves. But when you introduce a ton of items all at once, first of all, a lot of the entire pro meta or pro world doesn't have a chance to really figure out the nuance of what is actually pretty OP and what isn't OP. And so you have this convoluted mess in essence, which I think is one of the biggest things into which will include a lot of champion diversity. And I think we can normally see how Riot does their changes within, the League of Legends space and especially in pro play, is that they'll change the map, or they'll change specifically like jungle, right? Because jungle is kind of like, I like to call it the Big Bang within League of Legends, in the sense that, at the beginning of the universe or whatever, nothing really was happening, right? And then suddenly there was a Big Bang, which had all these atoms collide and stuff, because all the atoms were in like this particular order and they wouldn't move scientifically, right? Because movement is energy. And anyways, whole point is jungle is the Big Bang. So in probably Riot's theory, in order to have the Big Bang, you have to then change the jungle. And so they would change specific champion pools of that, or maybe map changes or jungle changes. But largely it got figured out by, Worlds time. And this is even including in part two, the Tracker's Knife change and the Sightstone change, because that often had to deal with a large part of jungle, because the only reason why you have vision in the very beginning of the game, at least, not towards mid game or late game, in fact, but in the early portions of the game, you have vision because you're trying to look out for the jungler, right? Like, that's one of the main points of what wards is to begin with, so that you don't get snowballed against. And so, that was one of the things into which, changed the entire thing, which was a jungle change. So I think champion diversity continues to rise. And I think we can even point towards Riot business model being, one of the things into which forces this, actually, because, it's not entirely surprising that the newest champion that they release happens to actually be pretty strong and pretty OP, or even slightly OP. But remember that pro players are going to push that slightly OP to the maximum edge, right? And any little edge that they can get, they're obviously going to take advantage of, right? So, you can also think of old champions like Twisted Fate, Ashe, Ryze. I guess Ryze is always fucking meta. You have Udyr earlier in the beginning of the year, remember? When, Chem Tank existed, right? Or Karma with Staff of Flowing Water. You have, Renekton and Lee Sin now with like Gore Drinker. Chem Tank, as I said, with Udyr. You have like Gnar, or even now Kiana or Talia, which are predicted to be meta within, once World comes around. So I think we're entering an era where, most of the world's meta is usually agreed upon rather quickly, especially with the usual suspects of LEC being one of the innovators. I think they're a very innovative region, which they figure out the meta rather quickly, and then LCK just adapts fast and then quickly adopts the meta and then perfects it faster than anyone else, even though they were slow on the boat, to begin with. And then LPL is kind of following suit after that. And then you have NA lagging behind because they're trying to copy LCK, which, is end up being slower than the LEC in terms of setting the meta. And so NA is usually always behind in that regard. And then they just aren't as good at adapting to the meta as fast as, the LCK or the LPL, etc. So with that said, I think the entire world's meta as we know it will be the most diverse that we've ever seen in terms of champion diversity, build diversity, etc. Ban rate diversity, champion pick diversity, all of that shit. Because I think really the item change has influenced a large portion of maybe how the meta works out and the different ideas, because there were so many items that were introduced in the very beginning that people haven't picked up on exactly how to master that and how to put that into their builds and whatnot, and to really have a consensus as to what the perfect build actually is. Because so much was thrown in initially, and that's how you shake up the meta to where it becomes incredibly diverse. You don't do that through jungle changes or whatnot, which are largely figured out at the very end of once Worlds comes along. So I think we're actually in for a treat as we progress towards Worlds, and with a lot of these play-in regions or whatnot, wildcard regions coming in, it's going to give some ideas for the actual group stage teams and major regions to figure out exactly how they want to play out this meta, and everyone's going to come in with their own ideas. And I actually think as teams have also realized that it's not about really playing towards a specific meta or whatnot. It's coming in with the strengths that you believe adhere to your team's style, which I like actually seeing, because every region or every team has their own style and it benefits their own players, and you have to play according to that. And more and more teams and more regions are realizing that. So we're having more diverse styles in essence, which is why I think this is going to massively contribute to probably the most diverse Worlds meta that we've ever seen.